Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Episode here in a continuing series, Model Museum, where I review every single Sega Model 1, Model 2, and Model 3 arcade game in a retrospective fashion. That is not an arcade racing game because I did that retrospective last year. And today we're taking a look at Virtua Cop 2. If you ever wondered how big of a success a game is, you should look how quickly the sequel to it comes out. The original Virtua Cop released in 1994, we get Virtua Cop 2 in 1995 on the Sega Model 2A hardware, a more increased spec revision of the base Model 2. And this game is bigger, better, more exciting, and visually a little bit nicer to look at compared to the original. Now don't get me wrong, I absolutely love the original Virtua Cop, but for my money, Virtua Cop 2 is the better of the two versions, and honestly, Virtua Cop 3 feels so different than the rest of the series, it may as well be its own franchise. That's not to say it's not good, it just doesn't have any of the same vibes going for it. Virtua Cop 2 here is just everything that Sega knew about a light gun game that was not horror, distilled into one package. And obviously back in the day there was a big rivalry between Sega and Namco with Virtua Cop and Time Crisis. And while Time Crisis and Virtua Cop have a lot in common, they also have a lot that differentiate themselves. I just absolutely love in Virtua Cop 2 here how this screen zooms around and moves around and constantly gives you part of the action. This game is fast paced, it's constantly moving, and it's constantly showing you something new. And this game has a ton of challenge. I particularly like these road sequences where you're trying to hit a moving target down the highway. Of course, as the camera zooms in, it becomes easier, but at the same time as it zooms in, that reticle saying that your opponent's about ready to shoot you also gets more red, which means it's a real trade-off between trying to get a closer shot versus hitting that shot from further away and protecting yourself more. There is a ton of strategy in Virtua Cop 2, and I really love that about the game. And of course, because it's a Model 2 game, it just looks spectacular. All of these bright, vibrant colors, the polygons that Model 2 could push, it all just goes to make a total package. And like I said, the original Virtua Cop is no slouch. It's a 9 out of 10 in my book. But because Sega brought Virtua Cop 2 so close after it, this feels like the true version of the game. After Sega had learned the formula, they were able to spend more time on the levels and the gameplay mechanics and less time on the underlying technology that would have made Virtua Cop possible in the first place. And that's usually what happens when you have arcade sequels so close together. The second game learns everything that the first game didn't quite do wrong, but could have improved upon, because at that point in time the developers understand the architecture and how to develop the game. They spend more time on developing the features and overall gameplay set. And that's what you have on display here with Virtua Cop 2. Absolutely perfect gameplay. The shooting is precise and accurate no matter how you decide to control it, whether you're on an arcade CRT, if you're using a Sinden light gun for IR, or just a mouse. If you miss a shot, it's because you missed it unless your light gun hardware is poorly calibrated. It just gives you all the challenge you need, and the gameplay pacing is incredible. You're going to zoom in and hit 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 enemies in a row, and if you get them all and don't take any damage, you're going to feel like an absolute action hero badass. If you do miss a shot though, you're going to know it was your fault. Like right there, your reload remanagement gets a little bit intense. You always have to make sure that you have a bullet in the chamber and use that reload functionality when you realize you have an opening, because if you run out of bullets and there's an enemy in front of you, you are going to take damage. And I do love that from the light gun perspective as well, having to manage all of it. And of course, it's got boss battles, and what would it be if a boss didn't come wheedling out of his way here with a gigantic virtual coffee truck to throw at you. It's hilarious. I don't know how he picked that truck up, but it's classic Sega through and through. Now as we move on to the second level, the other thing I like more about Virtua Cop 2 than the original is just the overall level vibes. We go from a city chase to a cruise ship, and you'll see the third level shortly. It's just a little bit more dynamic and vibing than the original game. And I love all of these really far away enemies. That camera will zoom, and it is so smooth and so fluid. It is just such a fun look. And you even get things here like enemies jumping out of the helicopters must have bionic knees, because mine would have shot through. The skin is a compound fracture, but all bone-breaking jokes aside, this game just constantly puts so much in front of you. It is so action-packed. It is just such an amazing, incredible game. And because it is a Sega arcade game, it also has an incredible soundtrack, so go ahead and listen for 45 seconds. It is really good, and I'll come back and tell you more about the history of the game. But enjoy.
Help me.
Just a perfect soundtrack that suits the game incredibly well, and in some ways it kind of feels like Die Hard Arcade, except the shooting version of it. I don't know why that is, but I've always kind of compared the two games, both in soundtrack and just overall action movie vibe. But I love looking at Virtual Cop not just as a standalone experience, but as I mentioned earlier, as a quick sequel to the original game. Because nowadays, when a game comes out and is popular, you may see a sequel in 2 to 3 years. That's kind of the average development time. But back in the day, Sega could get another sequel out in under a year. And I love looking at the games in comparison, because Virtual Cop 2 really does just feel like a bigger version. I almost wish that they had combined both games together as a compilation in arcades. Now, if you do want to own an original arcade board for this game, I do have one, but the resolution makes an absolute pain in the butt to be able to play unless you have a Tri-Sync arcade monitor, something that at the point of recording this video, I have not yet acquired. So I really do think the best way to play this game is any way other than an original arcade cabinet, unless you can walk into an arcade and play it. And if you do know where one is, leave me a comment down below, I would be curious, because I see so many House of the Dead cabinets still, but it is rare now that I see a Virtual Cop, because obviously these two franchises, House of the Dead versus Virtual Cop, you 100% know which one was way more of a success for Sega, and that's basically just how many arcade cabinets you're going to still see on floors. House of the Dead still everywhere, Virtual Cop is getting relatively rare these days. And as we move out onto the deck of this cruise ship, it's just an incredible look. This screams 90s, and the Model 2 hardware does such a good job selling that vibe. You've got really smooth textures, and all of the bad guys, even though they do repeat, because of course they're not going to be unique, have enough polygons to really register what they are. But I do love their sunglasses. Those mono lens basically look like safety goggles. Don't know who the villain in this game was and why he decided to issue all his henchmen those glasses, but it 100% does work. As we get out onto the ship here, we're going to do the final boss fight for this area as well. And I will say from stage 1 on, the bosses are going to be quite difficult, because you need to manage an entire screen here while you have 5 different jetpack enemies going around you at once. This is where having a second player is fundamentally important, because you can trade off left and right hand sides of the screen. One person manages one person manages the other, because you'll see there I had to shoot missiles on the left hand side as the enemy comes in on the right hand side to slash. This game is just more difficult as a one-player experience, and that's not a knock against it. Just get good at it. But if you bring a friend, not only is it going to be slightly easier, it's going to be a lot more fun, because all of these games were just meant to play as two-player experiences. It just gets that much more fun. But as we move on to the third stage, the train section, this is probably my favorite stage in the entire game. It is also obviously the hardest stage in the game as well, but it's going to throw absolutely everything at you. Enemies coming from every single area of the screen, and you will notice from time to time enemies will basically be near to shooting you before you can actually see them. It does seem to be like one difficulty pivot where Sega was trying to get some more credits off of you. I will say that every once in a while there is a cheap death to be had when the enemies pop up on the side, but honestly there's really not much you can do about that. That's just kind of how it works in an arcade game. It is there to get money off you. And I love as we come over the top of this train here as well, you get this outside exterior sequence. And if you haven't played it yet, the new Mission Impossible Sega arcade game, well, new was like 2 years ago, has an amazing train sequence as well, and that also extends into some other arcade games from Sega. They really do love a good train sequence, and honestly, how could you not? It's just basically a chase with a shootout at the same time. But what I'm going to do right now is give you one last taste of the soundtrack, because this next piece is some of my favorite in the game. I'll come back, tell you a little more history of Virtual Cop, and we'll close the video out. But enjoy! I do love the soundtrack, but if you don't like the sound effect of reload, you're going to be hearing it a lot of times, and I do wish in the test menu you could sometimes turn that reload sound off, because you can see it visually on the screen. It's really not adding anything by saying it to you at the same time. But I love this boss here. Kind of looks like Dr. Eggman just in a military tank. He's got that big stomach and the mustache you expect on Eggman. And I will say, interestingly, the final boss of the game I think is definitely the easiest of the three. Not shooting off any missiles whatsoever. There's like 1 or 2 here and there, and you can basically continue to unload on him the entire boss battle. But this isn't the final boss, it's just the final boss of this stage, as we are going to go to another boss in just a moment. But I love that he shoots out of the entire tank, comes at us, and all you have to do is shoot him a few times in the head so he doesn't hit you with the wrench. But once you finish all 3 different campaigns, you're going to go to the actual final boss, and this guy is just missile happy. This is Sega saying you gotta put a couple more credits on the machine until you can see the end. Even as a 2-player experience, trying to get every single missile out of the air in enough time is going to be quite hard, but I love the spectacle of it, that basically Hindenburg is going down in the background about ready to crash, and we need to shoot him out of the air. And of course, because we have unlimited credits, it's a very easy thing to do. And you even get another awesome credit sequence here where you basically save the day and all the bad guys that you shot are magically alive, because honestly, you never kill anybody in a Virtua Cop game, you just shoot them until they give up. But honestly, I love Virtua Cop 2, and while I know Virtua Cop 3 exists, I really hope one day Sega makes Virtua Cop 4 and goes back to the art style and overall vibe of Virtua Cop 1 and 2, because that's where the series shined, and for my money, Virtua Cop 2 is the best. Leave me a comment down below, tell me what your favorite Virtua Cop game is and what your favorite light gun game of all time is. I would be curious. I'll be back next Wednesday with more Sega Model series, and I'll have videos throughout the week, but we saved the day. We are done here, right off into the sunset. Bye bye.